Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 9 of our ukulele build. Well, last week on the show, we formed the neck and got all that straightened out. And now it's time to mount the neck. And what we need to do first is get out a piece of 3/4 inch MDF, make sure that the surface of it is completely flat, and what we're going to do is align up our body and our neck. Well, here we have our swanky piece of 3/4 MDF, and the first thing that I want to do here is put a center line onto the board that all of our pieces are going to align to. So I'm just going to come in 6 inches here off the end of the board and all the way along run a line at 6 inches in. Now this is going to be the main line that everything aligns to. So once you get this line drawn on this piece of MDF, just check it to make sure that it is actually flat. MDF can warp depending on how you stored it, so make sure that it's flat and then go and get the body of your ukulele. The next thing that you want to do is place your ukulele so that the center line of the body lines up exactly with the center line that you just drew. And once you get that all aligned, trace the profile of your ukulele down onto your MDF. Well, you may or may not be able to see here depending on the angle of my camera, but this body shape, of course, this is not flat, and it presents the issue just like we had with the neck and the tail blocks, that we're going to have to sand a profile into the neck in order to get it to sit flush onto the body. So this is a matter of patience and slow sanding here to try to get it to fit correctly. So what you want to do is start sanding this with a spindle sander, and bit by bit just bring it over to your trace profile and see how it's lining up. And then once you get a good dry fit, you can carry on from there. Well, once you've got all your sanding done and you're happy with the fit to your body, you can go ahead and carry on with the next step. If you're not happy with the fit, don't carry on. Even if you have to go to the extreme of making another neck, until you're happy with that fit, carrying on is just going to produce a disaster from here on in. So make sure that fit is right, guys. The neck of our ukulele is going to be attached to our body via epoxy, as well as screws that are screwed in from the inside of the instrument. So at this point in time, what we're going to want to do is mark and drill our holes in order to get our screws through in our body. Don't make these holes too small, guys, because you don't want to go ahead and split your body apart at this point in time. Once you get those holes drilled, you're going to want to drill your pilot holes into your neck and just screw the neck on for a test fit to see how everything is lining up. And there we have our 2 holes drilled in the body, and of course now we'll go ahead and transfer those holes over onto the base of our neck, and like I said, pilot holes and a test fit of the neck. Well, you've got your ukulele neck attached to your body just temporarily via those wood screws on the inside. For the record, I used number 8s by 1.25" with a 1/8 pilot hole into the neck and a 3/32 hole through the neck block to allow full clearance. The important part here at this point is you want to make sure with a straight edge that if you line up your neck and your guitar, or your ukulele body, that what you've got there is a straight flat surface all the way along. You don't want that neck tapering off to the back of the instrument or up to the front. It needs to be level with the ukulele so that the strings will sit properly once you get the fretboard in place. So at this point in time now, we're going to remove the neck. I know, pain in the neck. Oh, I'm so funny. And we're going to go ahead and start working on the back of our instrument. Well, if you guys remember way back in an earlier episode, I had put a little banner across the bottom of the screen and said that now might be a good time to trace out the back of your instrument. And if you did that, you should have your blank all traced out and ready to go. And if that's the case, head on over to the scroll saw and cut it out. You can use the bandsaw as well here, or coping saw, whatever you want to use, but I'm going to use the scroll saw with the number 2 reverse tooth blade and cut, remember, just outside the lines, because we're going to be using the flush trim router bit to trim this flush once we get it all glued into place. So the back is cut out, and like I said, slightly oversized, and that's the way we want it, for that flush trim bit to trim it flush to the body once we get this all glued down. But it's now time to add the bracing to the inside of the backboard of the ukulele. And if you saved some of your bracing from the soundboard, that's awesome. You won't have to cut more. But if you didn't, you're going to need some pieces of poplar, which is what I used, and they will be 3/16 of an inch thick by 3/8 of an inch wide. And I'll give you the positioning of these pieces once you come back and see me after you have some bracing ready to go. Well, like I said, we're going to put some marks on the interior of this instrument for our braces that'll go on the backboard. And what we're going to do is, from the top of the instrument, we're going to put a mark at 1 7/8 of an inch. Right there. And just let me throw my glasses on here. Our next brace that will be in our instrument will be at 4.5 inches. And then our last brace that's on our backboard is going to be at the 7.5 inch mark. Now, these pieces of poplar, like I said, are going to be 3/16 of an inch by 3/8, and their length is going to be determined by the inside tracings that you made earlier of your lining. If you're not sure or you didn't trace out the lining, that's okay, because you can cut them a little long and then just trim them to size by paring them with a chisel, and that's just fine. So let's go ahead now, get these things glued into place, cut to length, and glued along those lines at 1 7/8, 4.5, and 7.5. And now that those pieces are cut, just like we did with our soundboard on the front, we're going to apply a little bit of glue and glue these braces in place. We're going to use another piece of 3/4 MDF, place it on top, weigh it down, and allow it to fully dry before we start messing with it. So, well, you know what had happened last time. It was lunchtime at that point. So that's what I'm going to do. Glue it up, and I'm going to get a bite to eat. And all the braces are glued in, and I'm just going to go ahead and clean up some of the squeeze out. And like I said, flat board on top, a good heavy weight on top, and let it fully set up. Well, those braces are dried up now on the back of the ukulele, and what you want to do now is just like what you did on the soundboard of the ukulele. You want to take a sharp chisel and you want to trim down and shape the ends of each one of those braces and round over the tops of each one, knocking off the sharp corners. Then basically sit it inside your ukulele and test it for fit. Well, we've got all the braces shaped now, and we're ready to move on with the next step. And what the next step is going to be will be to mount a new piece of sandpaper onto a flat piece of MDF, and of course sand down the entire back of the ukulele, making sure that the lining and everything else is flat so that we can get good adhesion of the backboard to the instrument. Well, we've done the sanding, and as you can see, we've got a really nice seal around the backboard of this ukulele. So just like we did with the soundboard, we're going to go ahead and apply glue all the way around the inside on the lining and lay this all in place and place weights on it and leave it overnight for this to dry. And at this point in time, there's not much more to do with the body of the ukulele while that back is wet. So we'll leave that for overnight, but let's move on now to the fretboard of the instrument. Well, like I said, there's not much more that we can do with the body, so we're going to move on to the fretboard. And the fretboard is kind of a funky thing. It's got very specific measurements and very specific ways to do things, and there are some woods that are recommended, but for me, really any hardwood will do. As long as it's a good hardwood, you could use it for your fretboard. I'm going for maximum contrast between my neck and my fretboard, so I'm going with walnut. And any of you who have watched my show for any length of time pretty much know that walnut and maple is my favorite combo. But what we're going to need out of this piece of walnut is a piece that is 8 inches long, 2 inches wide, and it's got to be 5/64 thick. So that will be that 2 millimeters again. So of course, we'll be taking this piece of walnut over to our shop-made thickness sander, and we're going to bring it down to our 5/64. Well, we have the piece for our fretboard cut, and like I said, 2 inches wide, 8 inches long, and it's 5/64 thick. And I've checked it all the way along its length on both sides to make sure that thickness is consistent. That's kind of important. As well, your fret spacings are important here. And the way that the fret spacings work is there's a specific formula calculated from the edge of the nut or the inside of the nut up at the headstock to where the strings contact the bridge at the bottom of the ukulele. And for this particular setup that we're doing, the 12th fret has to line up exactly center between those 2 points at the inside of the nut and at the bridge. Now, I'm going to rhyme off some measurements as I go here as to where we need to cut the slots for our fret wires. But you may want to check online, or if you're following a plan for your ukulele, these particular measurements may not pertain to you. So this is basically a method of how to do it. It's not necessarily providing you with the exact spacings of your fret wires. Now, one of the bits of material that you're going to need for this build is called fret wire. And it's a funny thing. This is what it looks like. And it basically is the frets for your fingerboard or fretboard of your instrument. And it mounts in very specific sized cuts that are spaced at very specific intervals on your fretboard. And that is what we're going to start working on at this point in time. Well, like I said, there are very specific intervals to place these fret wires, and it is all based on the length of your scale, and in this case ours is 14 inches, and that would be the measurement from, I have a mock-up here of my fretboard, but that would be a measurement from your edge of your nut here down to the bridge where the strings contact. That would be 14 inches, and your 12th fret is going to end up exactly at half of that measurement, which is 12 inches. Get yourself an online calculator to figure out these frets, and I will tell you right off the bat, do not go from a template like this one, and do not measure or I wouldn't suggest measuring from fret to fret. I would always suggest measuring from the end where the nut is and measuring down. That way, if one of them should be off ever so slightly, you're not compounding the error as you go along the fretboard. I have the first fret wire marked on our board here, and on the opposite side I have written here that this is the top of the fretboard. That's just to keep everything aligned. I'm going to continue marking the lines for our kerfs all the way through, and I'm just going to run through quickly the measurements that they're going to be for this particular one, which happens to be 12 frets on a 14-inch scale. So this first one is going to be at 25/32 of an inch, and that's like 20 millimeters. This next one is 1 17/32 or 39 millimeters. This one here is 2 7/32 or 56 mils. This next one, fret 4, is 2 7/8 or 73 mils. On to the 5th fret at 3.5, which is 89 mils. The next fret wire will be 4 3/32 or 104 mils. This guy here, fret number 7, will be at 4 21/32 or 118 millimeters. The next one is 5 3/16 or 131 millimeters, 5 11/16 or 144 millimeters. This guy here is 6 5/32 or 156 mils. The 11th fret will be at 6 19/32, which is 167 millimeters. And of course the last one, if the 12th fret is exactly in the middle of a 14-inch scale, then we're at 7 inches, which is 177 mils. So I'm going to go ahead and mark all of those out, and then we'll be right back to see you. Well, in order to cut these slots for these fret wires, you need a specific thickness kerf in the fretboard, and that is provided by a luthier's fret wire saw, which I have right here. And this particular one has holes drilled in the blade so that you can install a shop-made depth stop, just to make sure that you get all your fret wires exactly the same depth into your fretboard. So I'll just show you this here, just so you're aware that it does exist. And with that now, we're going to go ahead and start cutting these fret wire kerfs. But you want to set up your depth by laying your fret wire onto your saw blade and setting your depth stop so that it rests against the bottom edge of your fret wire here. So let me see if I can explain this just a little better here. This right here would be an exploded view or an exaggerated view of our fret wire. And what it is that we need to do this here is our fretboard. We need to cut a specific kerf into the fretboard just deep enough so that this fret wire can be seated in here and sit flush onto the top of our fretboard. So that is basically what we are trying to achieve at this point in time, and hopefully this little drawing will clear up any questions you may have had up until now. Well, I have my fret wire saw set to the depth for my fret wires to be able to cut the proper depth kerf. I've also made a makeshift miter box, I guess you'd call it. And this is made specifically for the fretboard. The fretboard will fit perfectly down inside this gap. And what this is going to do is the saw is going to be allowed to ride right on there, perfectly straight, perfectly square to our fretboard. And of course, this piece of wood here, once it hits the surface of the fretboard, it won't allow it to cut any deeper. So our depth will be taken care of. We know that we're going to get a square cut because we're lined up here in our little miter box, and as well we know that we're square to the fretboard itself. So you might want to make yourself up a little miniature miter box like this just to help you, because I don't care how good you are, cutting straight with a handsaw is a chore when you need this kind of accuracy. Well, you've got your miter box made, you've got your depth stop on your fret wire saw, and you have all of your horizontal marks on your fretboard to cut the kerfs for your fret wires. So at this point you want to put a center line right down the middle, and that's going to help with alignment, but as well it's also going to allow you to mark for your center dots, and that will be a center dot. You will mark a line dead center in between the 4th and the 5th fret, in between the 6th and the 7th fret, and in between the 9th and the 10th fret. And those are going to get some shallow holes drilled in them, and we're going to work with those later, but for now you can at least get the marks on. So between the 4th and the 5th, between the 6th and the 7th, and between the 9th and the 10th fret, put a mark dead center. And that will be all the time we have for this week's show. A fair bit of progress made today with the back being installed, and of course the body flattened out. We also put the supports or the braces on the back of the body and got that all glued together, and that's sitting off to the side. We got the little miter box made to cut the fret wire kerfs, as well as introduced you to a fret wire saw and got a guide on there to prevent cutting too deep. We also got the fretboard marked and cut to its rough size, and it's coming along quite well. And let's not forget that we also got the neck temporarily connected and screwed onto the body, and that's shaped, so that's coming along quite nicely. When we join us again next week, of course, we're going to get into cutting the fret wires, shaping that fretboard. We still need to flush trim the back of the instrument, as well as, even though it doesn't call for it, we're going to put some binding on the back because I think it just completes the whole thing, and that's what I want to do. So join us again next week, won't you guys, where we're going to continue with this build. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I'm enjoying bringing it to you, and I'm going to see you again next week with yet another woodworking video.